welcome to this week's episode of the vBrownBag. It is October 16th, 2024. The vBrownBag is a weekly tech show where we talk with IT professionals, industry experts, cool folks from all around the world. Tonight, our guest is Kevin Evans. He's a Microsoft technologist, and he's going to talk to us about what's next for cloud solution architects. My name is Damian Carlson. I am one of the co-host for the vBrownBag. You see my other co-hosts here on the screen, Shala, Roger, and Chris. Two of them are busy at work, and Chris is at a conference, so also work. So it's just going to be Kevin and I tonight. If you have any questions for Kevin, feel free to throw them into the chat on your platform of choice. You can tweet me at vBrownBag, and I am behind that handle, and I will respond. And yeah, love to have the interaction, and thank you all for joining us this evening. So Kevin, there you are. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
Doing really well, thank you. Doing really well. It's been a busy week for me. We were talking a little bit before the show started that I got a home assistant running on Proxmox in some old
Nice.
home lab gear, which was really great. Actually, I hadn't used Proxmox before. It was definitely a lot easier than messing around with KVM, just bare KVM and Cockpit. If you've ever done any of that on Linux,
I have. I'm a big
yeah,
fan. Big
yeah,
fan of Cockpit. Yeah.
yeah. Cockpit is great. I was actually really pleased by it. KVM's kind of initial decisions were annoying to me, like how it did storage and networking and pretty much everything. Proxmox it reminds me of the of that old company that used to start with V. You know, like it just.
We can't say that anymore, right?
Oh no.
Like we
But
have to sign that like global NDA. Do you remember that? Yeah.
yes, but yeah, it was really cool. I actually really enjoyed it. So enough about me. How about yourself? How are you doing?
Well, I want to start off with home labs. I've got a feeling we should have probably started talking about this, but
Okay.
I recently just did my new home lab, right? Again, I used to use a famous hypervisor, right? Beginning with V and ended in I, right? So there was that. I then you know what? I containerize everything, right? So I'm at that stage in my life, right?
Mm,
Where I don't really do virtual machines anymore, right? I grew up with them. I've done them at work. I still do them at work, right? They're used a lot, right, in the
right.
industry, but now I've got Ubuntu server running on a Intel, I think it's an i7 or i9 NUC right before they stopped making them, right? It's in like a year old. It's got
Mhm.
64 gig of RAM. The operating system only uses 800 megabytes. And I've got micro K8s running on there, but interestingly enough, I have Azure Arc installed and I control it from all from the Azure portal.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's really effective as well. Like I can do whole GitOps thing and push containers there, right, from GitHub and all sorts of stuff, right? Maybe we
You
should
know
have had a
what?
session on that, right?
Yeah. Actually, I'm gonna write that down.
Let's
Because that
come back
is,
to that, right? I'll
yeah. That is a really good idea. I've actually got a couple old Nooks behind me. That's what I set that Proxmox up on. But yeah, I never thought about using Arc for that.
so
That, that'd be interesting.
you can just you can basically you interface directly with the Cube API, right?
Mhm.
And away you go because inside of Azure as well, I believe our like out the box sort of we've got our own version of Linux now. It's called Azure Linux, right?
Mhm.
Which is like it's derived from a Red Hat kind of base, right? It's not Red Hat, but it's that kind of architecture rather than Debian. But
Right.
like Ubuntu is like we're big partners with them, right? Like with other cloud service providers, and it just works. So, do you know what? I'm more than happy to come back and we could go through it,
Yeah.
right, and do a demo on it. I think that would be really good. But yeah, home
What?
labs, is what it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, what do you do for your day job, if you don't mind me asking?
So I'm a senior technical specialist,
Hmm.
right? People go, well, what's one of those, right? Well, Microsoft likes to come up with names for things, right?
Yeah.
It's basically a pre-sales cloud solution architect,
Okay.
right? Um, it's more around the innovation and like getting the juices flowing, as I like to call it, right? With customers and communities and getting them to adopt and use our cloud platforms in the right way, right?
Right.
So I do that. I've been a CSA though for about, well, it was before Microsoft. It was a while anyway. I was being a CSA then, but yeah, Microsoft. It's been about 3 years. I just hit my 3 year anniversary. So
Oh,
yeah,
congratulations.
thank you very
Yeah,
much.
that's awesome.
It's
Um,
been a ride. I'll be honest.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm actually kind of fascinated by Microsoft as a company because I, kind of grew up in my career um, at the end of Windows NT, right? So it was like Windows 2000 and things like that. So yeah, I
I won't
remember when we had like 72 gig SCSI spinning disks, and
remember those.
that was enterprise storage, buddy. Like that was, and when they came out with 144, it was like, wow, uh,
So
144 gigs.
I'm gonna date myself here, right?
Yeah.
But in England we do things a little differently. So I was like shipped off to an internship at 14,
Hmm.
right? Because school couldn't control me basically. Um, my first job was upgrading from NT4 to 2000, right? And
Yeah.
then I was in my element, right? To your point, like those SCSI, like I remember, I'll never forget his name. It was Paul, and he was teaching me about SCSI raid systems, right? At 14 years old, and telling me how fast they were and how
Oh
the
yeah.
different raids worked, right? And
Oh yeah.
again, the same excitement on your face was, and we got to 144. And then there was like, was there Raptor drives? What they call Raptor drives you could get, right? Like SCSI Raptor drives. I can't remember
Yeah.
the manufacturer, right? But yeah,
Yeah. But I remember it in those days, Windows or even Microsoft. I think they had a different approach to the way that they do business. These days, it's a totally different Microsoft. I had actually gotten away from kind of the cloud stuff because I used to work for the company that starts with V, and I worked for them for 5 years. And because
right.
of my role, I was really focused on their stack, right? Um, they really love to talk about their stack and other cloud providers, but my role didn't really touch on those things. And so when I left that company at kind of the beginning of my sitting down and falling back in love with technology, I signed up for an Azure account. And I
Nice.
remember sitting at my in my MacBook, an old personal MacBook I had on Firefox, logging into Azure, hitting the Cloud Shell, and getting Bash or PowerShell. And I tell you what, I fell back in love. Like I was so happy. I was like, oh my gosh. And that may not sound like a very amazing thing to people, um, to other folks, right? But uh, them doing something on a non-Windows system, on a non-Windows browser, cross-platform, cross-language, right, is just fascinating. Being able to use WSL2 on
Oh,
Windows and stand up a Linux, kind of, uh, uh, gosh, I can't even think of the name of it, but it's effectively a Linux, like Hyper-V VM, right? That lives on your system. Absolutely fantastic, seamless, right? Like this is not the Microsoft that I grew up with, you know. not the Microsoft of my teenage years, maybe. So, yeah, I totally forget where we went with that, but yeah, or where I was going with that. But yes,
Do you know what? I couldn't agree more. Like for me, I grew up with Windows. Well, they called it Wintel, right? Do you remember that? That was like the code
hmm
name, right, for it all. That was my sort of era growing up, like managing data centers, and my career started there. And it, but I was a Linux guy. Like it
mm.
fascinated me, Linux did, right? I don't know if it's because I watched Hackers when I was young, right? And I was like, "Ooh, what are they using?" But it
Yeah,
was it was I started off with Red Hat, right, in that world,
yeah.
right?
hmm
And is that not a
Sorry,
fire alarm? Is that a
yeah,
fire
I think
alarm?
my wife set off the fire alarm. I'm gonna mute my mic,
It's okay. So
but please continue.
no, no worries, no worries. So, if we think about like you said, like everything can be done via bash. You can use PowerShell if you want, right? But you've got this seamless integration with developer tools now, right? Using, Ubuntu backends, right? And you can drag and drop a folder from the Windows Explorer into your user directory in your Linux container, right? Running on your laptop. And my mind was blown when that happened. I was like, and then when you fire up VS Code, it just integrates straight away,
Oh
right?
yeah, 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 absolutely. Having PowerShell on Linux is just wow.
It's a different experience, right?
Yes, yes, it's amazing.
So, I mean, I don't know if you saw the announcement this week as well, but like we're in the Azure portal, like if you do ClickOps, right? You can export resources to ARM templates, right? Which are very painful, right, for people. Like you have to be like a machine, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, to understand them, right? They're very complicated. But then we have Bicep as well, right? Which is our own domain specific language, right? For writing infrastructure as a code. But we absolutely love Terraform, right? And now you can export, like if you've got resources deployed in the Azure portal, you can now export them to Terraform templates natively, and it will write those for you. So 9 times out of 10, when you learn something in Azure, you go and do it in the portal first. So now you can reverse engineer it into Terraform. And I'm just like, it's like, what's your favorite ice cream? We'll
Right,
do it
yeah,
all, right? We don't
yeah,
care, right? And that's what I really like about the platform. It's very will work with anybody, right?
yeah, absolutely. Can you give me one moment? I want to make sure that there's not an actual
Yeah,
fire.
go fix that, right?
I'll be right back.
No,
I actually didn't realize how loud that was until I took my headphones off. Good Lord, I am so sorry.
it's
Uh,
okay.
we just got a cold snap here in Texas, and she lit a fire in the fireplace and did not open the flue. So,
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
oh,
yeah.
great.
So she apologizes.
It's
So
all good.
everyone,
I'm just glad that, a window was opened, right? Like
oh
it was
yes, yes, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think what we're really kind of underlining here is, and I'm going to try to segue back to
what we were originally going to talk about, right?
yes, sir, yes, sir, yes. I think what we're talking about here is just like the maturation of technology, right?
Correct,
And as things become more fungible, like infrastructure resources, right?
correct.
Like you almost don't care, unless you're in the business of selling the hardware. You really don't always care what your stuff runs on, right? And so, understanding what could be coming down the pipe for cloud solution architects like yourself, I think is a really good thing to talk about. And I hope none of your opinions are controversial. So,
Well, they are a little bit, right?
okay,
So
good.
the reason they're controversial is because I've been thinking about this a lot, right?
Yep.
So I was do you know what I was like? I was asked to do a course on how to become a cloud solution architect this year, and it got me
Yeah.
thinking. Right? I was like, well, what is a cloud solution architect? Because when I started off doing this, like in 2016, AWS was everywhere, right? And was conquering, right, at the end of the day. And I remember taking all my certs and I said, I'm going to be a cloud solutions architect, right? Because
Hmm.
that was the natural progression from me, right? Being a sysadmin or a data center manager to move into the cloud, right?
Hmm.
So that's what it meant to me, right? But then we had this other path of the TOGAF gods, right? So people
Right.
would take this course, right? TOGAF, right? And become, certified architects from an enterprise point of view, right? And they
Hmm.
would write 200-page documents on how things should be wired together, right? Kind of thing. No short task, right? Like a really hard job, right?
Right.
But doesn't work with cloud because cloud's too fast paced, right? And
Right.
that's something that's naturally progressed, right? Like
Hmm.
that's difficult. So you had like an architect to me was the most senior person in the room that would draw out diagrams in Visio, right? And say this is how things are going to be put together. And then a high level design was put together and then a low level design, right? And for folks that don't
Hmm.
know what they are, right? Because again, that's where the confusion comes in even more, right? And I'm going to get onto that in a minute, right? With platform engineering and DevOps and all that kind of stuff. It's a document that was pretty much like, um, this is how we're going to do things, and it's not really going to change within 4 to 5 years,
Right.
right? And we would build massive environments off the back of this. It'd have
Hmm.
everything in there, like storage, compute, networking, basically trying to build a data center, right? But in the cloud, someone else takes care of that for you.
Right.
It's very abstracted, right? So, cloud solution architect. Again, all those different moving pieces. But then how does somebody and this is a path that I took as well. If you become an infrastructure developer or a cloud developer, that's another role title, right?
Hmm.
Which is similar to the same thing, right? Or a DevOps engineer. I have to use I don't want people starting to shout at me for saying DevOps in the wrong way, but it's now and platform engineering is the same.
Hmm.
I build my architecture, I write in a README file in GitHub, and I have some architecture diagrams in there, and I commit my code. And that's now the high level design or low level design, right? And it's an organic workflow. It's not a document, it's an organic workflow that keeps on getting revised. So it came to me that I thought, right, and this is my controversial statement, is the cloud solution architect role dead? Is it got to that end of its life cycle, right? Because it came out what, 2015, 2014. Like, I'm ready to be corrected out there. There might be someone that might be like, I was the first cloud solution architect, right? Back in 2008, right? Or whatever it was. But that's where things are going now. Everyone does everything as code, right? That's the utopia, right? I mean, I'm not saying every environment's like this, but how, we have people now that consume cloud services and they don't even care how it's running, right? If
Right.
I'm a developer, right, I just want a database or I want a Kubernetes cluster, right? And that's where platform engineering comes into it with patterns and everything. Well, I've no longer got an architect drawing a picture and saying this is how it's all wired together and all those bits and pieces. And
Right.
that got me thinking, like really, really hard. I was like, is this the turning point? Is this the next iteration of the cloud, right? Because what are we now on? Cloud V2? Something like that, right? Like it's Cloud V3 just around the corner kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like it's like Web 2.0, right? Like kind of thing. It's
Right.
like what's the next iteration of it, right? Like how do we consume it as customers, right? Or as technical folks. So and now we've got, a cloud solution architect used to do everything, but that role's probably split down to 4 or 5 domains as well, right? So if we look at data and AI, that's its own path,
Hmm.
right? I remember back in 2018, I was deploying data services all over the place.
Right.
Well, I'm not a DBA, right? But I was deploying those services. We now have people that are specialized just in AI, right? I mean, that itself, it's its own, like, wrap your head around that kind of stuff, right? If you can understand the language models and everything else that's going on, like more power to you, right? Like I look at that stuff and go, I'm going to need a beer after that, right? So
Yeah.
it's, but I can deploy AI services, right, for them to be consumed. Um, Infrastructure is so broad as a term because it means everything, right? Like
Yeah.
all roads lead to infrastructure. And now we've got like the new kid on the block, which has been around forever, but is sort of being taken very seriously now, which is cybersecurity. And now we have cybersecurity architects, right? So, like, I'm certified as an Azure architect and a cybersecurity architect with Azure as well. But I was doing it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that we're moving more toward kind of a service oriented architecture that isn't, that was always classically like within the software development domain, right?
Yeah,
But more like it's still services and business applications, right? But we don't necessarily care how like Azure Functions works underneath beyond the needs of setting up a function, right? Like, um, so is that what you're thinking, that it's going to be more around like what is the data flow? What are, like what are kind of the the needs of the business oriented around these different cloud services?
I think you're completely right. The feedback I got, right,
Hmm.
was about my course was this is very business focused. And I went, yeah, because the questions I'm basically the interface between business decision makers and the technology,
Right.
right? That's great, Kev. Nuts and bolts, fantastic. Is it going to do the idea that I've got, right? Or
Right.
the service that I've got, right? Services come and go. Technology comes and goes, right?
Right.
It's the I had a manager once who called it the eternal hamster wheel, right? That's what he called it. And I thought it was a great analogy, right? Of he'd been in the industry a long time, right? But he was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it's the next shiny thing, right?" And you're right. They just want to know if it's going to meet the business demand, right? And
Hmm.
that's what a cloud solutions architect is to me, is somebody that can translate those requirements, but it's becoming more of a challenge because the platforms are that broad now, right? Like the T-shape architect, right? Like
Hmm.
I need to be as broad as possible, but then go in the right direction. And that's why I think you need that squad behind you, right? To back you up now, because those pots are their own domains, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, services architecture, services design, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. I heard someone the other day, and I forget where I heard this. It might have been on Discord or Slack or something like that. But the general analysis was that we're losing the ability as architects to be able to architect at an like a physical infrastructure level. And you know, we also see like the ebb and flow of companies running to embrace public cloud, and then companies realizing, for whatever the reason it may be, maybe it's just a short-term financial gain. Oh, let's repatriate that back, and then it's like,
Oh, it's
well,
too
how
much
the
like
hell
hard
do we
work.
do that? you know so like is that kind of a, do you think that skill of being able to sit down and use those physical building blocks to design something in the physical world, right? Do you think that's that's a dying skill? And I
Do you
know
know
this might
what?
be a bit of a tangent.
No, no, I think it ties into it a little bit. Do you know what? I've been mentoring like younger folks, right, over the
Mhm.
past couple of years, and none of them want to do networking.
Oh, it's fun.
And I'm like, that's all I wanted to do. It
Yeah,
was it was
yeah.
painful, right? Like if you got that CCNA, you were a god, right? Kind of thing,
Hmm.
right? So it was like me working in a data center, right? Building servers, provisioning services, installing operating systems, all that good stuff, right? Like, stuff that we look back now and go, why did we do it that way, right?
Right.
Is I can actually picture the whole process in my head when I'm designing stuff. Like, it gives me an edge,
Yeah.
right? Um, I do think hybrid cloud is I say coming back in style, right? Because people were doing it before, right? They had presence on premise, the premise in the public cloud, and then the weight shifted, right, to public
Hmm.
cloud, right? I do think it's coming back in a better way. Um, so understanding how that works, I think, is going to give people an edge. Like we were talking about home labs before, right? Like
Hmm.
I wanted to see how close I could get to deploying a miniature Azure data center in my home, right? And I mean, I could probably go a lot further if I had Hyper-V and Server Manager and Azure Arc and all that kind of good stuff, right? But people are doing it in different ways now, right? And again, having those building block layers, like knowing how storage works, knowing how connectivity works, knowing how compute works, like you
Right.
remember this, like chopping and dicing your servers up to get the maximum power, right, for an
Hmm.
application. Like it was because once you bought that piece of tin, right, the finance department weren't going to give you another PO, right? So it
Right.
was understanding how all that worked, right? How can I sweat this piece of tin as much as I can? And I do think it's a dying art because the like I have, you know, I have colleagues that have just come out of university and they're like, what's Hyper-V? Right? Or,
Yeah.
would you mean what's a hypervisor? Right? And it's that kind of thing. And they only know the cloud.
Right.
And I start to feel old. Like I normally go home at that point and reflect on my life, right? And what's happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's okay. I too had this was maybe 2 years ago. I was working with a younger architect that was actually doing some hands-on physical server work, and
Nice.
he was talking about the network that he was setting up, and some of the issues that he was having. And it occurred to me through the course of the conversation that he didn't know like VLANs, right? Like, and I just kind of had this like holy heck moment, right? Like, I I bet I forgot more than this guy knows, right? And not at all to be like rude or condescending or but it's just like, wow, like I forgot that stuff, and this person maybe hasn't learned it yet, right? Like that's a weird thing to experience that I wouldn't have been able to understand if someone told that to me 25 years ago, you know. So
Uh, I was looking at something today and it was a tools conversion from on-premise to cloud.
mhm.
And it was like a HP management tool. I was like, "What's that?" And I googled it and I went, "Oh yeah, I used to use that to flash
Yep.
firmware on motherboards, right?" And I was like again, that's all. Like, to your point, like when people go back on prem
Right.
or they try to attempt it, they realize they've then got to go around flashing all the firmware on their storage arrays and everything. The pain starts to come back, right? The
Yep.
PTSD, right? So they end up going back to the cloud, right? So it's
Yeah.
it's people now need to just be knowledgeable of platforms if they're in a technical space rather than the building blocks.
Mhm.
Like you log into a web portal, it doesn't matter if it's GCP, AWS, or Azure, and it's about do you know the building blocks inside of there? Because it's all software defined, right?
Right.
Different game.
Yeah, yeah, it is quite different. So is that would that kind of be your headline for what's next for cloud solution architects to be more business oriented and also not to lose sight of the building blocks?
I think for me, it's what's next is you need to decide what you want to do next. If you want to become more technical, right? You want to stay in those technical roots, right? And carry around a toolbox, right?
Hmm.
As my father would say, right? Then look towards becoming a developer, right? And I don't mean a developer of applications, I mean an infrastructure developer, right? That is a persona. So you get to do all the cool stuff of building services out, right? And learning all of this, but you also took security, platform engineering, cloud native concepts, right? Operating systems, the whole nine yards, right? Or you may want to go into data and AI, right? You can pivot. That's the beautiful thing about being a CSA. Um, or you can go like hardcore cybersecurity, right? And secure the world, right? Create that walled garden for everybody. Um,
Yeah.
I think those are the next stages of the domains. I just don't know what you would call them, right? Because there's only a couple of them that would adhere to the architect role, right? Like architects, yes, you need to be able to translate business requirements, but that also sends you on a different career path as well, right?
Yeah.
That you know that that sends you down more the enterprise route of um, being that translator for the business, right? And one day you may even end up as like a field CTO, right? That kind of thing. It's more of a strategist role. So
Right.
I think there's more paths of opportunity. That's probably a better way of explaining it, right? So it's probably not dead. And I mean, I did put a Twitter poll or an X poll out about this and got absolutely slammed on it. God, I love the community, right? They're like, "What you on about, Kev? How many beers have you had?" Right? It was, but I just think it's evolving, right? Um, but yeah, don't take your eye off hybrid cloud. That's probably my takeaway on that, right? Like,
So I've got two questions about that.
go for it.
The hybrid cloud one I actually want to come back to, but just real quick, when we're talking about kind of the evolution of the cloud solution architect role, or even the need for infrastructure developers, et cetera. Um, if there's someone that is listening to this now or in the future, and it sounds to them like that's something I'm really interested in, is there a certification or a learning path that you think would benefit them in that role?
Yeah. I Do you know what my first piece of advice is? Pick a cloud.
Pick a cloud.
Pick a cloud.
Yeah.
Pick one that's going to get you a job, right?
Right.
Don't pick the one that's not popular in your region, right? In the market share. And you're wondering, how do I know that, right? And it's again, ask around, right? Ask your local communities, your meetups, some of the more wiser people in your community, right? Understand the market share of your area, right? North America, South America, Europe, wherever it may be, understand the market share, right? Because there's no point picking a cloud service provider. You may really like it, but no one's using it, right?
Right.
And I mean, that's going to be pretty difficult, right? But there are proportions of market share out there, right? Like I know in Canada, where I live, Azure's king,
Hmm.
right? So
Go with
what's you
Azure.
trying to get it? Yeah, go with Azure, right? You've got more probability of getting a job, right? So
Yeah.
pick a cloud service provider and then try and go for one of the associate exams, the broader ones. Like, and like I'm gonna pick on the AZ 104,
Right.
right? For Azure, because obviously that's my bag. But AWS has an associate exam as well, right? For cloud solution architect. They took the kitchen sink at that exam, right? Everything's in there.
Yeah.
Storage accounts, connectivity, compute, right? It's all in there. Security, containers, right? There's a bit of everything. Past that, and then you'll really know which direction you want to go in, because you'll be like, when you've learned in those different building blocks of that exam, you'll go, I really enjoyed that part. I'm going to lean more on that after this, right? And that'll
Yeah.
set you up. I always say start there, because then you can pivot.
Okay. So choose your cloud, and
Yep.
this advice is for people who are wanting to work in this space, right? Choose the cloud that will pay you.
I mean, it's capitalism, right? 101, but it just
Well, yeah, yeah. Don't choose a cloud that doesn't do business in your area of the world or is unpopular. And then do like the entry level kind of solution architect or even administrator. Is AZ-104 an SA or an administrator cert?
it's an
I forget.
administrator's course,
Okay.
right? But it will
Okay.
give you a broad grasp of the Azure platform. And then, like I said, you could pivot to data and AI, or you could go up and get I think it's the 305 and then become a full certified architect, right? Or you can go down the cybersecurity route, or you can go down apps and dev, right?
Yeah.
It's a great one to pivot from.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also say that for folks who are thinking about it, my personal advice would be to look at the fundamentals exams, right? I actually took a number of the Azure fundamentals this year.
The
I did
900,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, the Azure fundamentals really great. It explains how Azure works and what the terms are, and how these things work within the Azure world. I took the data one and I realized, wow, I hate this. I don't want it at all. I mean, it was just was not my jam, right? Like I did not enjoy it. It was terrible. And I'm glad I passed that fundamentals, but and then I did the AI one, which was also a really good introductory
It's good, right? Yeah.
AI space, right? It talks about all of the AI stuff. And at the time, I think Azure's AI workspaces uh, were probably not that well integrated because I ran into a lot of frustrating bugs, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, do a fundamentals, right? They are really inexpensive. I think I paid $99 for each one of those. And the AI one, Microsoft was doing a cloud challenge. If you
You can get them for
take the
free
free
sometimes,
course,
right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I did the free Microsoft Learn course. I got a voucher and I went and I got the cert for free, right? So there are other opportunities out there that isn't just jumping headlong into administrator role if the person that's listening to me right now might be a little bit put off by that. And by doing the fundamentals, you could find a space that you resonate with and then explore that further. So,
I I
um,
I completely agree, and I forgot all about the AZ900 because obviously I'm a technical guy and I went straight down
right.
the rabbit hole, right, Damian? So,
That's totally okay. I don't blame you one bit. But it's a great start. From from my perspective, I felt like there was probably a strong overlap between kind of the technical sales cert that Microsoft might do internally, uh, and the AZ fundamentals one, right? It was just like, okay, this is the same thing, right? Like, can you fog a whiteboard? Do you know what a region is? You're good, like, or fog a mirror. But yeah, it was, yeah. Um, so thank you, Kevin. Actually, that's really good insight on certifications. My second question wanted to go back to when you were talking about your perspective that hybrid cloud is coming back, and I think I remember you saying for the right reasons or coming back for better reasons.
yeah, I started playing around with Arc at the beginning
Hmm.
of the year, and I was like, I wish I'd have had this when I was in Korea, right? Doing on-prem stuff. Like you can now
Yeah,
do everything through the Azure portal, right? To manage those resources like RDP, RBAC, so role-based access control, right? So logging in with MFA, right? Like all the plumbing and everything taken care of by one agent. I'm blown away, right? And
yeah,
I can now do backups, like all those tasks that we all started off doing, right, at some part of our career, right? I was the tapes guy, right? I remember because no one else wants to do that job. They're like, get the get the kid to do it, right? Kind of thing. And it's like, but it's all tied in there, right?
Yeah.
And it can be on Windows or Linux or Unix or whatever your choice of ice cream is.
Hmm.
I think that's going to be really interesting because then you're going to have to learn about site to site configurations, right? Or
Right.
connectivity again, right? We're coming back into that, right? Where normally you would have a networking team, but now you've got to learn about SSL again, right? And how does that work? Or routing traffic back up to your cloud from on-prem. Like I've got scenarios where like I've been set some challenges where, you know, for example, people are like, come on, Kev, everybody's in the cloud. And I'm like, well, yeah, but there are scenarios out there where you can't deploy to the cloud, right? So what do you mean by that? Well, like I've got a customer base that's oil and gas, right? Up here in Alberta. And they're like, well, we've got a mine. It's 3 miles underground. Can you get Azure in there? Right. And I'm like, hold my beer, right? Let me
Right.
see what I can do, right? Like,
Yeah.
so again, like we'll set up some tin, right? Underground network cables down the shaft, right? I can only I can only imagine what's gonna go on. And we're going to control it from Azure, right? That kind of thing, right? Or we've got OT devices that we've got just pumping straight up to the cloud, right? So
Right.
it's all those front end and back end apps were like the low hanging fruit. I know they would have been painful migrations for most people, right? But now we're onto the stage where as we look to space as well, right? With everything that's going on there, it's well, how do I build a data center on the moon, right? Like, how do I
Right.
control? Like, that's going to be the next stage, right? So, if we can do it at the bottom of the ocean or in obscure environments where, a cloud service provider doesn't have a region or a presence out there, like, how do customers build their own and then make it interact with their cloud service provider that they've got, right? Locally. So, I think that's going to be really interesting. It's something that I'm having a lot of fun with because to your point, it's making the cogs turn again. That all that information that I learned from my mentors, right, early in career is coming back, right? Like, okay, I
Yeah.
can understand the building blocks again. So
Yeah. Yeah. For all the years that I worked with on premises folks, right? So, for a long time, I was on the customer side of the table, doing what I used to joke was honest work, right? and then I went over to the vendor side.
same
I
here,
went over,
right? Yeah.
yeah, I went over to the vendor side in maybe like 2008 or 2010, um, because I mean everyone was doing that at that time, right? Like everyone was jumping to EMC or something else, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
um, I worked for EMC for a long time, and then I ended up kind of getting inherited into Dell when Dell bought EMC, and then I worked for the V company, right? And all of those companies really care about on premises stuff, and so I kind of believed in the private cloud, right? And then I believed in the hybrid cloud, but only so much as the private cloud was part of it. It wasn't until I logged into Azure, when I was telling you that story of me going into Cloud Shell and seeing Bash and PowerShell available to me on Firefox on Mac, and just like having that light bulb moment of, wow, this is a new universe than the one I remember. Um, Logging into Azure and seeing, or even AWS, seeing the ability to provision a virtual machine with a wide range of storage availability, with geographic separation available. Like private cloud can't do that. Maybe some of them can, right? Like maybe if you're you know the US government or JP Morgan Chase, like maybe they can do that on
FSI,
their
right?
private
Yeah,
cloud, right?
yeah.
Yeah, maybe they can. But you know uh I don't want to get too far afield from my idea here, but I actually kind of came to the realization that private cloud was probably a lie. Like the third greatest lie that was ever told. But i- you know, I actually, when I heard you say that hybrid cloud was coming back for the right reasons, what I interpreted that was that it was reasons that were driven by real needs and not
Correct.
reasons driven through FUD, right?
Yeah.
And I've had those conversations with people in the technology space where they're like, oh, you can't trust the cloud because costs, you don't know what your costs are. And it's like, to me, I'm thinking, if you don't know what your costs are, you don't know what you're doing, right? Like,
That's right. The tools are there, right? They're very
yeah,
transparent, right? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I can
Pay
go
for what
on
you use, right? It's not
right.
difficult, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go on all three of the big ones here in the US, right? GCP, Azure, and AWS, and I can basically price out exactly what I want down to the penny, right? But you need to know what your business needs are. You need to understand that architecture in order to be able to
Correct.
fully understand the total cost of ownership. Um, but yeah. Anyways, I had a good point in there somewhere, I thought, and I might have accidentally stepped on a soapbox instead. So let's get back on track. So in terms of folks who might be in the cloud solution architect role now and thinking about where things go moving forward, what would you want to say to them?
I would say, again, back to my point, do you want to be more technical or do you want to be more of a strategist? Right? I
Right.
think you need to start off at that point and then you can make your decision if you go left or right. Right. So I do think platform engineering is something that's going to take off, right? And it's not the next iteration of DevOps. It's just a way that we consume services yet again, right? But we use Kubernetes as a platform, right? As the infrastructure layer, right? Um, to provide services, right? Via infrastructure as a code, right? But then there's the strategist part where you're doing the big blue sky thinking, right? And you're directing organizations to adopt technology, right? And
Hmm.
I think that's something that you really need to look at and sort of build out your route. Now, for some people, they'll know immediately what they want to do, right? What they love doing, what they enjoy doing, right? I've struggled with it because I like to do both. And what I found is that I really struggle to do both because you have to be either down in the trenches in the code or you're out, trying to understand what finance is doing, what the HR requirements are doing for that next business service right application, right? And
Yeah.
they're different worlds. They really are.
They are. And for that type of scenario, I would think that you would almost need to partner with like a business analyst type of person, someone who understands how their business operates, and and those two people can kind of interact and exchange ideas, right, on how to solve those problems. Um,
But yeah,
well, this has been a great discussion. Thank you very much. I lost track of time, and yeah, we've been talking for nearly 50 minutes now.
told you we'd be rambling, Damien. Right?
Yeah, yeah, but you know what? Here's a little bit of a ramble, but who doesn't ramble, right? Not everything needs to be that like breathless delivery of information that you get on YouTube or TikTok these days, right? Like
Right.
sometimes a little bit of discussion is good. Um, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about, or anything that's kind of top of mind for you?
So I'd like to come back and do the Azure Arc thing. Right.
Hmm.
We can be very descriptive doing that, I believe, right? Very technical. We can get into the weeds on that. Um, but no, I just it's coming up to the end of the year. Try and think about what you want to do next in your career, right? Maybe make a mental note. have a respite, right, up to towards the end of the year if your life permits it, right? But
Yeah.
try and find your coordinates again, right? Try and find out what's next. I think that's something that really helps you move forward to the next stage or what it is ever you want to do, right? Is when you make a plan. Like, I'm going to commit myself to the CKA exam, the Certified Kubernetes Admin exam.
Right.
So that's the next one for me. That's a very technical exam. It's all CLI driven, right? There's no multiple choice, so you've really got to know your stuff, right? But
Oh, awesome.
I know, right? I've got to be honest. I took it once, Damien, and I failed it, right?
Uh,
But it's
it's
a
tough.
tough one because it's not.
Yeah.
It's bring up Vim, right, and go to work on this YAML file, and your head explodes, right? Because you're like, what's Vim, right? So, but yeah, that's where I'm going. That's where I'm going next.
Awesome. Awesome. Failing a certification can be really tough. I've failed one, and that was the first one I took, and I never forgot how terrible that felt.
That's horrible, right? Yeah.
Of hitting that finish button, and it's like, nope, didn't do it. It's just, ugh.
Which one was it?
It was, I think it was vSphere 4,
The V company,
maybe.
right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was golly, I think it was like VCP 4, right? Is the
Wow.
one that
Okay.
I
That's back in
yeah.
the day a bit, man. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
I kind of, I went back and I passed that one, and then I got a bunch of the other, like, VCP and VCAPs and stuff like that after that. But yeah, just uh for you to fail it and to not get in your head about that, I think that's pretty great. I wish I had that superpower.
Do you know what? Certifications come and go. There'll always be something new, right? Like,
Yeah,
I've just learned that I'm not good at everything. That's probably
right.
a better way of tackling it, right? Like, it's just it's even worse when they don't tell you where you go wrong, right? At the end, and you're like, "Well, where did I go wrong?" And they go, "Well, you just didn't get the percentage, right?" But yeah,
Yeah.
you just got to keep going at these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, some of them are a little bit blinded. I think it was maybe a GitHub cert I took recently that
They're
didn't really
solid.
tell you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really, man, that was a tough cert. And it was like a foundation cert. It was really difficult. There was just a lot of information there. But yeah, if I remember correctly, at the end, they didn't even tell you what you got right or wrong, right? It was just like, here's your score, thanks, right? Because they kind of guard those things closely, probably for to keep it out of brain dumps and things like that, right? But yeah, it was certs are
That
tough.
will get better because
Yeah,
they're the first iterations, right, of those exams, right? So my guess is they'll probably follow the Azure model where you have those bars at the end that tell you,
right.
how good you are, right, in the specific areas. But I think it's going to take a few iterations for that to
Yeah,
happen, right?
yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Those are hard exams. I took one. I swear it had like 100 questions in it. The one I think it was like a partner one before it got released, right? And I was taking it. I was like, I but don't even know what that is. I've never even heard of that, right? So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How can folks find you if they want to connect with you on social media? Where can they find you?
So you can go to my website, codetocloud.io, right? Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on YouTube as well, right? So I do some YouTube stuff as well. And I talk about Azure and do Azure-y things, right, on there. But you can also find me on Twitter as well at the Kevin Evans, right? So
Uh, Okay, awesome. I'll throw that in the chat. Cool. Well, we are almost out of time for this evening. Any final thoughts?
no, it's been a pleasure to be on the show. I'm a fan. So
Yeah,
thank you very much for having me on.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Azure Arc. You can actually go to vbrownbag.com which you already did, Kevin, but I'm gonna say this for the benefit of anyone else who might have listened this long into the show. Go to vBrownBag.com and you can sign up to be a guest, and it's super easy. You can join us. So thank you. I guess that's it.
Awesome.
Alrighty. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening or a good morning wherever you are, and we'll talk soon.
Bye for now.